Sasha Banks, the blueprint, the standard, the draw, underrated, underappreciated, and undeniably the MVP of the pandemic era. I'm about to hop into all of that underrated, underappreciated, and why she is the MVP. Stay tuned. I'm not going to keep you here for very long. We're going to hop into all of it. You can find me. If you're on YouTube right now, feel free to hit that like button. And if you got comments on Sasha Banks, whatever, I will respond to them in the comment section. You can find me on Twitter at 2SweetPod. That's the number 2, Sweet P-O-D, and at OMG Corey B. So, ladies and gentlemen, man, Sasha Banks and Bailey have been on an incredible roll. I've enjoyed everything that they have been doing, but we are going to jump into Sasha Banks only and why. First, she's underrated and underappreciated. Look, man, going all the way back to when they all debuted, if I'm not mistaken, it was Sasha, it was Becky, and it was Charlotte. Sasha Banks was the draw. And nothing against Becky, and nothing against Charlotte as well. Charlotte was being positioned as the top person that's coming in. But the way I remembered, man, Sasha Banks was the draw. She was coming off that incredible feud with Bailey. And just so even at that point, to me, underrated and underappreciated, as Charlotte was being built as the top draw coming out of NXT. And look, man, she quickly became one of the best things about WWE, woman or man. Like, she was the most consistent things. One of the most consistent people in WWE. The character was incredible. And man, speaking of underrated matches from this woman. Like, it could be argued that Sasha Banks is the only one of the 4 horsewomen that has each horsewoman's best match. Like, many people, when it comes to Sasha and Charlotte, many people love that Hell in a Cell match. I'm partial to that 30-minute Iron Man match that they had. That was incredible. That's my favorite. Obviously, Sasha and Bailey at NXT TakeOver. And man, now look, this one is kind of dicey because Becky and Charlotte had some hellacious, hell of a great matches. But many people argue that Becky's best match was that Hell in a Cell match from Sasha. Sasha Banks is incredible in that ring. Once again, underrated and underappreciated. And speaking of underappreciated and underrated, when people have this discussion, I see this discussion come up a lot. People talk about the GOAT for women's wrestling. And for me, not enough people mention Sasha Banks' name. And here's the deal for me. For me, I don't have a necessary GOAT, because the way I look at it, if your answer is not of a woman from this era, then to me, that answer is wrong. Like, for me, they all, for me, are the GOATs. Like, in this era, all of these women are so much better in this era. Sasha Banks being one of them. Like, if Sasha Banks is not in your handful of people that you mentioned as the GOAT of women's wrestling, then to me, that answer is wrong. They are all tremendous, and Sasha Banks is somewhere near the very top. So, speaking of, we're sticking in underrated and underappreciated. I'm not going to keep you here for very long. Maybe a few more minutes, but for me, she's been very underappreciated by WWE for so long now, man. And it just shows up in the booking to me. Like, don't get me wrong, Charlotte and Sasha, that feud was incredible. They had some great matches, some great moments. But what really hurt that feud to me, and as a person that extremely liked Sasha Banks in NXT and had built up all of my hopes that, you know what, this is just going to be great and they're going to get behind her in the booking, this feud really hurt me more than it upset me. Because you mean to tell me that we have 2 talented ladies here and Sasha Banks can't make one title defense in this entire feud? Like, to me, that really took away from the feud, even though the ladies just were outstanding in this feud. Don't get me wrong. Like, I would have liked to have seen some good booking go along with this feud, and it just did not go that way for Sasha Banks. And I gotta say that was the first point that really I looked at WWE and Sasha Banks, and I was like, man, I give up. Like, it's never gonna. She can't even. They won't even let her defend the title. So why am I getting my hopes up? Nevertheless, the ladies had an awesome feud. But speaking of more uneven booking, Bayley and Sasha. Like, when Bayley got to the main roster, like, I fantasy booked Bayley and Sasha at WrestleMania for like 3 or 4 years straight. However long Bayley has been on the roster, I kept saying, well, this is the year, Bayley and Sasha at WrestleMania. And finally, we started to get some tension with Bayley and Sasha. They were in a tag match, and Bayley dropped down from those ropes, and the fans just exploded because they were behind Bayley, and we all wanted to see this match. And they kept teasing, and the follow-through was Dr. Shelby? Like, everybody wanted to see Bayley versus Sasha, and we didn't get it. And once again, more uneven booking to where you had a situation with Sasha Banks, and it was obviously, the case was obvious of what you should do, and they didn't follow through with it. So that was disappointing. Bayley and Sasha, they won the tag titles, but for me, the best thing out of that feud, besides the good matches, was that Sasha Banks actually defended a title for once. And it was like, oh, thank you, God, about time. But moving on, ladies and gentlemen, Sasha Banks comes back, rips the wig off, and she immediately gets into a feud with Becky Lynch. And just more uneven booking for me. We were at a point to where these two needed each other, in my estimation. Becky Lynch needed a credible challenger because she was running through the division. Sasha Banks needed a big feud because she had all the momentum in the world. And going into that match, I remember saying the words, Sasha Banks better win here or it's gonna hurt the women's division. And Becky won. Not that I don't have anything against Becky Lynch. I love Becky Lynch. That match, as I just spoke about earlier, was incredible, man. It is literally one of the best matches of whatever you want to call it, the women's revolution, the new women's era. It's one of the best matches, not just WWE, but overall. But not the best match of that pay-per-view by far. But once again, Sasha Banks should have won. She didn't, and she lost momentum. That's just my opinion there. And there's been a lot of times where I've looked at Sasha Banks, I looked at WWE, and I'm like, give her some momentum, give her some consistency. That's all I want. And look, man, the great thing is this. I'm finally starting to see consistency. And now we're going to jump into why she's the MVP of the pandemic era. Like, at this point, Sasha Banks is must see. Her matches are outstanding, whether it be with Asuka, whether it be with whomever. She's going on NXT and having phenomenal matches with Io Shirai. Phenomenal tag matches, man, left and right. Speaking of a tag match, man, the reversal into the bank statement that she put on Kairi Sane a couple of weeks back was tremendous. Like, the match with Asuka, tremendous. Like, tremendous match after tremendous match after tremendous match. And this woman is consistent, not only with the matches, but the character has always been great as well. The legit boss, that has always been a phenomenal character. And bit by bit, her promos are getting better as well. She's getting great as a promo as well. So she is improving left and right, man. The stuff that she's doing with Bayley has been great. Like, that's another thing that has been steadily gaining momentum. They have been phenomenal. And at this point, for so long, man, I wanted to see Sasha and Bayley break up. Break up. Let's get the match at SummerSlam. Let's get the match at WrestleMania. Let's get the match somewhere big. And now I'm at a point where, no, I don't want to see them break up. Like, they are doing some tremendous things right now. They're funny. They're entertaining. Bayley is getting better at promos as well. I like her as well. And no, I don't want to see them break up because they're doing some phenomenal things right now. But here's the deal. It's gonna happen eventually. They're gonna break up. And here's the glorious thing about this. We'll never see it coming. We'll never see it coming. We'll all be shocked, even though in the back of our minds, this is what we want, all I had been wanting for years. We'll never see it coming. So I've enjoyed Sasha Banks. She is clearly the MVP of the pandemic era, and I cannot wait to see what's next, man. She's in the feud with Asuka. We'll see how that turns out, how that continues to go, whether it continues to go or not. But nevertheless, she has been the MVP of the pandemic era, the boss, the blueprint, the standard, the draw. Like, I love every bit of it. So let me know your thoughts on Sasha Banks, the MVP of the pandemic era. Do you agree that she's the MVP of the pandemic era? Let me know on YouTube or on Twitter at the number 2 Sweets POD. That's 2 Sweet POD, or at OMG Corey B.